Chapter 6. From the thicket the manhunter sprung. My cries echoed loud to the air. There was fury and wrath in his tongue. He was deaf to the voice of despair. The slave. The emperor's favorite retreat in the Briar's garden. The Malay slave. Napoleon's general information and versatility of conversation. Consternation of Captain Poppleton at the supposed escape of his prisoner on his first riding excursion after Napoleon left the Briars. The only exception to the emperor's habits of regularity, when with us, was in his hour of rising. In the midst of our garden was a very large pond of transparent water full of gold and silver fish, and near this was the grapery formed of trellis work, quite covered with vines of every description. At the end of the grapery was an arbor round and over which a trellis of grapes clustered in the richest profusion. To this spot, which was so sheltered as to be cool in the most sultry weather, Napoleon was much attached. He would sometimes convey his papers there as early as 4 o'clock in the morning, and employ himself until breakfast time in writing, and when tired of his pen, in dictating toothless causes. No one was ever permitted to intrude upon him when there, and this little attention was ever after gratefully remembered. From this prohibition, however, I was exempt. At the emperor's own desire, I was considered a privileged person. Even when he was in the act of dictating a sentence to his causes, he would come and answer my call, come and unlock the garden door, and I was always admitted and welcomed with a smile. I did not abuse this indulgence and seldom intruded on him when in his retreat. I remember, however, one day a very pretty young lady came from the valley to pass the morning with us. She was dying to see Napoleon, but the heat was very oppressive, and he had retired to his arbor to avoid it. I hesitated for some time between the fear of disturbing him and disappointing my friend, but at last Miss C appeared so mortified at not seeing him that I ran down to the garden and knocked at the door. For a long while I received no answer, but at length, by dint of thumping and calling to the emperor, I succeeded in waking him. He had fallen asleep in the arbor over his papers. He came up to the door and asked me what I wanted. I said, "Let me in and you shall know." He replied, "No, tell me first what it is, and then you shall come in." I was then obliged to say I wished to introduce the young lady to him. He declined seeing her and desired me to say he was unwell. I told him she would be dreadfully disappointed and that she was so pretty. "Not like the lady I was obliged to say agreeable things to yesterday," he rejoined. I assured him she was quite a different person, being very young and handsome. At last I succeeded in getting the door open. As soon as I found it unlocked, I ran up to the table where he had been writing and snatched up his papers. "Now," I said, "for your ill nature in keeping me so long at the door, I shall keep these, and then I shall find out all your secrets." He looked a little alarmed when he saw the papers in my hand and told me to put them down instantly, but I refused and set off round the garden, flourishing my trophies. At last he told me if I did not give them up, he would not be my friend, and I relinquished them. I then took hold of the emperor's hand for fear he should escape and led him to the house where we found Miss C. I introduced her to Napoleon, and he delighted her excessively by his compliments on her beauty. When she was going away, he walked down the lawn with her and lifted her onto her horse. He told me after she was gone that she was a very pretty girl, but had the air of a salesgirl. The golden fruit in the modern garden of Hesperides had for its dragon an old Malay slave named Toby, who had been captured and brought to the island as a slave many years before and had never since crossed its boundary. He was an original and rather an interesting character, a perfect despot in his own domain. He never allowed his authority to be disputed, and the family stood almost as much in awe of him as they did of the master of the Briars himself. Napoleon took a fancy to old Toby and told Papa he wished to purchase him and give us freedom, but for some political reason it was not permitted. The old man retained ever afterwards the most grateful sense of Napoleon's kindness, and was never more highly gratified than when employed in gathering the choicest fruit and arranging the most beautiful bouquets to be sent along with to that good man Boney, as he called the emperor. Napoleon made a point of inquiring whenever I saw him after the health of old Toby, and when he took his leave of him, he presented him with 20 Napoleons. The emperor was very accessible while at the Briars, and knowing how much it would delight us, he seemed to wish to return any little attentions we were able to offer him by courtesy and kindness to our friends. My father, one day during his residence with us, invited a large party, and the emperor said he would join us in the evening. He performed his promise and delighted everyone with his urbanity and condescension. When any of our guests were presented to him, he usually inquired his profession and then turned the conversation upon some topic connected with it. I've often heard wonder expressed at the extent of Napoleon's information on matters of which he would hardly have been expected to know about. On this occasion, a very clever medical man, after a long conversation with the emperor on the subject of his profession, declared his astonishment to my father at the knowledge he possessed and the clearness and brilliancy with which he reasoned on it. Though his theories were sometimes rather heterodox, Napoleon told him he had no faith whatsoever in medicine, and that his own remedies were starvation and the warm bath. At the same time, he professed a higher opinion of the medical, or rather surgical profession than of any other. The practice of the law, he said, was too severe an ordeal for poor human nature, adding that he who habituates himself to the distortions of truth and to exultation at the success of injustice will at last hardly know right from wrong. So it is, he remarked, with politics. A man must have a conventional conscience. Of the church also, les ecclesiastiques, he spoke harshly, saying that too much was expected from its members and that they became hypocrites in consequence. As to soldiers, they were cutthroats and robbers, and not the less so, because they were ready to send a bullet through your head if you told them your opinion of them. But surgeons, he said, are neither too good nor too bad. Their mission is to benefit mankind, not to destroy, mystify, or inflame them against each other. And they have opportunities of studying human nature as well as of acquiring science. The emperor spoke in high terms of Larrey, who he said was a man of genius and of unimpeachable integrity.